I'm going to call to order the City Council special meeting for Monday, January 14th, 2019. Madam City Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Mayor Christy Malchow.
Present.
Deputy Mayor Karen Moran. Present. Councilmember Tom Hornish.
Present.
Councilmember Jason Ritchie.
On his way.
Councilmember Chris Ross.
Present.
Councilmember Pamela Stewart.
Here.
Councilmember Ramiro Valderrama.
Present.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Moran, would you say the pledge, please?
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
What time are we supposed to be out of here tonight?
I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councilmember Ross? Your light's on. Oh, okay. All those in favor of the agenda say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, by a vote of 6-0, the agenda has been approved. We'll now have public comment. This is an opportunity for the public to address the council. 3-minute limit per person, or 5 minutes if representing the official position of a recognized community organization. If you would like to show a video or a PowerPoint, it must be submitted or emailed by 5 p.m. the end of business day to the City Clerk, Melanie Anderson at manderson@sammamish.us. Please be aware that City Council meetings are videotaped and available to the public. Do we have anyone on the list? No? Would anyone like to address the council? Okay.
This will be real short because I think you've received my letter. Ella Moore, 290 Northeast Alder. I'm with SHS and I'm speaking as a member. And I would like to recommend Walt Carroll as our special commissioner to the King County Landmarks Commission. Walt is one of the founding members of the group. He started in 1999, and he is a store of historical knowledge. And he doesn't toot his own horn, so you probably are not even aware of all the things that he has done. But he answers all of the questions that come to our website, and he and Steve Thews are our outreach representatives, and they give presentations to schools, to community groups, to civic groups, and there's never hesitation for him to do that. And I think having a knowledge of the history of this, not only the landmark property, he's been with us from the very beginning when we started restoring the Reared House, and he's always willing to help. He is someone who is very well qualified to be our representative, so I would just like to endorse him.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to address the council? Okay. Seeing none, we will move to our new business item, which is interviews for the Landmark, Planning Commission, Park and Recs Commission, and the Arts Commission applicants. Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you, Melanie. Hi, Claridel. I know this is not new to you, but just go ahead and come up to the podium here and just give us a little bit of background on yourself, and then we'll ask you a few questions.
Ahead. All right. Excuse me. Claridel Shed, 2313 Sahali Drive East, Sammamish 98074. I am here to respond.
So, Claridel, if you want to just give us a little bit of background on yourself and your.
At my age, there's a lot of background.
Well, let's keep it concise. We're only here till 7, so.
Color, too.
Maybe just something relative to the Arts Commission.
Moved to this area 43 years ago from Southern California, which was our 12th move after we married, and been at the Plateau 33 years, Sammamish. One stop sign when we moved here at the corner Safeway. The roads were all dirt, so we tolerated the dirt roads and watched the city become alive. In fact, every time I go into the Sammamish Highlands, I kind of nudge Harry and say, aren't you glad I wrote that letter? Because I remember years ago writing the letter to the Bartell family, begging them to build a Bartell's in Sammamish Highlands. So now I am pleased that they responded and we have the benefit of Bartell's. So, you know, we go, unfortunately, way, way back, but maybe that's fortunate as well. But we've watched the city blossom and loved meeting all of the other people who've been attracted as we were so long ago. We've watched the city increase in population and the attendant situations that accompany population growth. And I don't want to say we've been reclusive, but we have learned to love home. And there's no place like home. So we're satisfied to be here, and actually everything that we need is here. We really don't have to go very far away from Sammamish for any of our needs or wants. Okay?
Very good. I'll open it up to council then for questions.
Well, are we going to do the standard questions?
I think you can do the standard questions, or you can ask other questions if you want to. No. You have the questions in front of you, so we can ask them, I think. Or you can ask whatever you want to. But you have the questions right in front of you, so we can push buttons and...
It'd be faster if he does it.
Okay, there you go. You're on. Sorry, you tried, but...
We'll follow along.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I have a couple of questions for you.
Right.
And I think we're talking about the Arts Commission, correct?
Yes.
And if you could give the council a brief explanation of what stimulates your interest in this particular commission.
Well, first of all, whether it's a good label or a bad label, I've often been called an overachiever. And so I like to see change for the good, and I like to discover where a niche might be, where I could provide some of that good for the community. And so I have to believe, since this is now would be my third term, that I must have found a niche. And I think that's the answer to my question.
Okay. And also, if you could give us just a brief explanation, is there any specific issues you would like to see the commission take up during your tenure?
Actually, I have a project before me that I think will tax my time for the next several years. I think the makeup of our Arts Commission is very amenable to being interested in one another's projects, because when people come in to the commission, most often they really don't know where their niche will be. But after months there, they seem to cozy into a comfortable niche. And so my present project I've been with that project over 2 years already. And since I have a continuation of that project before me, which encompasses many more units, I foresee, although I do have a lot of research already accomplished toward those proposed units, I foresee that probably my research is going to take from 2 to 3 years to accomplish that total of 27 units. So that kind of tells me what I'm going to be doing potentially for the next several years. And even thereafter, people have suggested additional projects which are very similar to what I'm in the middle of right now. So it seems like there's no end to the possibilities.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, looks like we may have some additional questions. Councilmember Ritchie?
Thank you. Hi, Claredel.
Hi.
I want to thank you for all the work you did on the wrapped utility boxes. It's very, very nice. It's been nice. with my
Thank you.
sons. It's incredible. It's a really nice resource. Hope people take advantage of it. I want to apologize for being late. Got stuck in traffic. But I want to ask you, given your several terms on the Arts Commission, what works, what doesn't work? I know that you're a leader on the commission, and I guess I'm curious as to, you feel like you're heard. What are the practices that you've seen in other commissions? Maybe have you sat in on, I know you sat in our meetings, but what are the things that work and don't work in a commission setting that from a group, you're trying to build a consensus to get things done. You've been successful. What's that been like for you?
I believe the City Council has been terrific in impressing on all of us as we apply for appointments that they want a mix of potentially creative people, and that they will support our creative ideas. So I think that it's like, if you want to become creative, then put yourself in the midst of creative people. Mm-hmm. And that's the environment that we seek to create within the confines of the commission. Get creative people in there, independently creative people. Get go-getters, get starters, people who are starters, who dare to create. And so the beauty, really, of a thriving arts commission is the combination of a city council which says, we want creativity, we will encourage and support as a council that creativity, and then we report, because we're accountable, since you appoint us, we're accountable to you when we report back and say, hey, I have an idea. How do you feel about this? Will this fit into the character of our city? And let me add that we in the Arts Commission are ever, ever vigilant about the character of Sammamish. We want to listen to you and your ideas and work the same direction in creating, establishing, and maintaining what the community wants to be the character of Sammamish.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Valderrama.
Hey, thank you, Claredel, again for stepping up to serve once more, and thank you for all the work that you've put into the wraps that you were mentioning. There was another piece of art that you, Lynn Garrison, Margaret were involved in that was approved by the council and even the funding, which was, at one time it was called Sammamish Symphony. I don't know what the name was, but the purpose of that was a unifying art that was going to be to unify the city around. And I haven't heard much about it. I know you were instrumental in that with Lynn and Margaret, and I wanted to know, what is the status of that art?
Actually, we're still working on getting that off the ground. That's the best way I can describe it. Also, and I think maybe the newcomers are not aware, but my project prior to the wraps were the roundabouts. And since I do belong to the Heritage Society, I am trying to make an attempt to create and have the people of Sammamish enjoy our heritage. And so you probably know that the roundabouts are all wood from the Red Barn, where the caboose was located, and I begged for Norbert to give me the barn, and he gave me the barn, and we disassembled it and used that wood in our roundabouts. And I've been to all the schools. The children have all been told the heritage of the roundabout that sits out in front of their respective school. So when the wraps are finished, and I've been in contact with all the schools regarding field trips for the wraps, I certainly want to get the council together, and we will take a tour of all of the wraps. And hopefully, maybe you might learn a little tidbit here or there about Sammamish and what happened at that particular spot.
Thank you. Do you see the symphony art, in your opinion, going up this summer, by the summer?
My personal answer is no.
Okay. All right, thank you.
It's going to take a while.
Yeah, all right. It's a shame we were excited about that.
I'm excited about all art,
Claire,
all forms of art,
sorry.
you know, the performing arts, etc. Excuse me.
Oh, no, I didn't mean to cut you off. Please finish. You okay? Mm-hmm. Okay. I was just going to say, I don't see any more questions up here, but
Okay.
Claire Dell, thank you so much for
Okay.
coming, and you're welcome to stay in council chambers if
you.
you'd like and listen. Thank you so much.
Thank you for consideration.
Okay, so I'm going to try really hard to say your name. Is it Ireless?
Excellent.
Oof, good, yes. Okay, so just give us a little bit of background, your interest in the Parks Commission, and we'll ask a few questions on the back end.
Okay. I'm started off my professional career as a teacher, then became an environmental consultant, which just about 180 degrees, I guess. I'm a current volunteer for the Symphony, and I'm president of Sammamish Heritage Society as a volunteer. My background, I've lived in 3 different countries. English is actually my second language, so I have a sensitivity and understanding of people who come here from other cultures and other ethnic groups and other languages. I've worked well managing different people. I successfully taught boys from 13 to 18 as the only woman in a boys' school, which was something. In my environmental career, I coordinated with field engineers, with outside consultants, state and federal agencies and representatives, as well as the owners and their attorneys, and sometimes balancing those was quite a challenge. And part of that environmental work was assessing landscapes, both for their former use, their current use, and potential future uses of the property. My interest is that I can see and I know that Sammamish has an excellent range of outdoor spaces and opportunities. I want to help the Parks Department keep it that way. I believe that well-managed outdoor space of various kinds is critical, not only to our health and well-being as people, but also to the environment around us. I want to work with the Parks Department to implement the PRO plan because that plan reflects what the community wants. The Parks Department went out with the consultant and solicited opinions and ideas from various members of the community, and I think that's critical. And I want to continue to help the department meet the needs of the many groups it serves, from passive recreation, like the walking I enjoy, to the organized sports that my grandchildren enjoy. And I want to see the Parks Department continue to serve the different ethnic and linguistic groups that we have in the community. As far as specific issues, I want to make the parks and the facilities work for as many people as possible. I want to balance levels of service between different groups and different plans and different ideas. And I want to help balance the fiscal concerns about purchasing additional property and maintaining existing parks and facilities.
Very good. Mr. City Manager, I think you're up.
Madam Mayor, I think she answered the questions, unless
pretty
you
much
want to
did.
ask those same questions in regards to the Landmark Commission, because she's being considered for one or the other.
This is true.
Ms. Vanderhoff, if I could ask you kind of similar questions that you just answered regarding the Parks Commission, if you could indicate what stimulates your interest in the Landmarks Commission as well, since you're going to be considered for both commissions.
I try not to repeat too much, but I'm looking at many of my environmental contracts involved restoration and reuse of historic property. I think if that can work, it's critical, and it can't always work, but I think it's an essential thing to try and do when it's feasible. My work with Sammamish Heritage Society, including the preparation and presentation of 2 successful landmark nominations to the Commission in the last couple of years. I also worked extensively on Sammamish Heritage Society's recently completed survey of historic properties. I did some of the field work. I worked on the Excel spreadsheets where we summarized all the field work. And I was also responsible for setting up all the entries into the state's wizard database, which I won't discuss what I think about the state's database, but we did it. Because of my background and my experience, I believe it is both appropriate to save, restore, and reuse historic properties when we can. And that's essential for our youth to understand what came before us, what happened here before they arrived in the community. There are very few historic properties left in Sammamish, as most of you know. We need to help homeowners preserve them, if possible. The landmark listing offers opportunities both for helping the homeowners and for protecting properties. So I believe that the Landmarks Commission is doing an essential job to help us keep some historic property. Just as a quick summary of the 157 properties we surveyed, one has already been landmarked and is on the National Register. Only 26 others are sufficiently unaltered to be potentially eligible either for National Register or for local landmark nomination. I want to see some of those preserved if we possibly can, and I think that's where the Landmarks Commission comes in. And in terms of specific issues with the Commission acts on behalf of the city and provides historic preservation services to Sammamish on a contract basis. So the commissioner from Sammamish is a special commissioner and is representative of the city for properties in Sammamish. But you do also have an opportunity to develop policy and planning, and I would like to contribute in that way. And finding my experience in doing nominations has given me the skills to review and decide how nominations should be accepted or not accepted, and to give out also the certificates of appropriateness, which allow either changes to properties and occasionally and sadly to demolition of the properties. And I want to be involved in that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Arliss, I have one question. Because you've put your name in for 2 different commissions,
did.
do you have a preference?
Oh, my understanding is that from Doug Eglinton, who did both positions, that they're perfectly compatible because the special commissioner to the Landmarks Commission doesn't have as many obligations. If I had to prioritize, I would probably say the Parks Department, simply because it seems to be more of a challenge on an ongoing, regular basis. But I would like to do both.
Okay, appreciate that. Any other questions? Okay, I don't see any. Arliss, thank you very much. Appreciate you being here. You're welcome to stay in council chambers and listen if you'd like.
Okay, I think I'll excuse myself if you don't mind. I
No
wasn't
problem.
Feeling terrific.
Okay, well, feel better.
Thank you.
Good evening. We'll have you come up to the podium here. Just give us a little bit of background of yourself, and then we'll ask a few questions of you.
Well, I have a long and storied background in history. Real quickly, I have it from heredity. My mother had her master's degree. My father met my mother in a graduate history class. He had his degrees in journalism. I was grown up learning history. My degree is in chemistry, and then later I got an MBA. But history has been more than just a hobby. And back, probably the first organization I belonged to is the Fort Vancouver Historical Society in Vancouver, and I joined it when I think was 10. And my father wound up being president of that for a good long while, and I helped out there. And we moved up here in Sammamish in 1986. And we joined the Redmond Historical Society, since there wasn't a Sammamish anything at that point, and got to know a lot of the people up here. There weren't near as many people, and started becoming familiar with what was going on in the history of the area, mostly the north end at that point. And then when Sammamish became Sammamish, my wife and I joined the Sammamish Heritage Society, and she was one of the founding members of that organization, and I was kind of drawn in as the working husband that would go do stuff, and that was, being hands-on and doing stuff is my forte. And the first big project I got into after I retired was the Sammamish Heritage Society had a locker, and it was like in one of these old cartoons. And literally, when you opened the door, stuff came out. And so I spent about a year organizing the little locker and explaining to people we had more stuff than there was cubic feet in the locker. And now we have 2 lockers full of stuff. And one of the things that I look forward to is using the Reard Freed House to expand all this dandy stuff we have and to put some of it on display. I'm the so-called archivist, and so I go out to events and haul artifacts of one kind or another out. And any questions or?
Yes, sir. I have a couple of questions. One which I think you've pretty well answered, but I'll give you a chance to add to it if you choose to. And that is, what stimulates your interest in serving on the Landmarks Commission?
Well, the Landmarks Commission, I've seen us lose a lot of what I call landmarks. And I was kind of part of this process of landmarking things that we got started. And we've moved up to, I think, 1941. And we've lost in the last year 2 houses that I'm just devastated. The biggest devastation was Minnie Baker's house. and I could probably sit up here and talk for 5 hours on Minnie Baker. And what a wonderful, because she kept things, and probably 50% of the documents we have came from Minnie Baker of the school districts starting in 1889. But yeah, try to identify stuff that needs to be saved, and if nothing else, document the heck out of it before it goes away.
Okay. Besides those particular issues, are there any other issues you would like to see the Landmarks Commission take up during your tenure?
Well, yeah, other than structures, there's, you know, and again, this is kind of off. I look at some of the routes up here, and particularly the old railroad routes, and some of our streets. If I don't know if you're familiar with where Monaghan was, and that was the big town that's now part of Sammamish. But from it, there's 2 roads that wind up the hill, and they're actually railroad right-of-ways. And in fact, I had a family call me up in February, and they went out and found a bunch of steel odds and ends, and they assumed it was lumber stuff, and no, what they'd found is probably a service area for the logging locomotives, because they were mostly steam. But you know, follow the trails up and where they went.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
Any other questions from council? I don't see any. So, well, thank you very much. Appreciate you coming in this evening. You're welcome to stay and listen if you'd like, or head home for dinner.
Oh, gosh. Yeah,
It's a tough choice, right?
As entertaining as you guys are, I may opt for dinner.
I don't blame you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming in this evening. You're opting for dinner too.
I am. This is dinner
She
until I
does.
get home.
Oh, yes, well. Good evening, Seth. We'll have you come up to the podium here, give us a little bit of background on yourself, and then we'll ask you a few questions on the back end.
Yes, fantastic. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
So hi, my name is Seth Van Grinsven. I'm 28 years old, and I moved to Sammamish about 5 months ago. I was previously living in Redmond for about a year, and before that, Northern California. I applied for the Parks and Rec Commission mainly because nature is one of my passions, one of my 2 big passions. My other is animals, and that'll be relevant in a second. But in addition to serving, or hopefully serving on the Parks and Rec Commission, I do weekly volunteering with the Washington Trails Association. Recently got back from a 2-day trip to the Bogachiel, working on trails out there. And my other volunteering, as I said, was animals. I do a lot of work with the Sammamish Animal Sanctuary. You guys may be familiar with it.
Yes.
If you're not, I hope you at least go check it out. It's really cool. Bring your kids.
Tex.
Yes.
Have a couple.
The steer, that's the Jersey steer they have there.
Have a couple of questions for you. I think you touched on it a little bit, but what stimulates your interest in serving on the Parks Commission?
Yeah, so a few things. I really want to get involved in politics at a local level at some point. It's on my 5-year plan. And I think this would be a really good way to introduce myself to kind of the procedures and some of the things that are involved at the local level. I think that it's a good way to learn, and especially on the Parks and Rec Commission, where it's not so much. Yeah, I was talking to some of the guys that are applying for the Planning Commission, where it seems a lot more. I guess you need to be more knowledgeable in that area, if that makes sense, right? Like you need to know all the regulations around development. That wouldn't be me. Parks and Rec, like I said, is more of my area for trails. So. Yeah, that kind of stimulates me. I want to see Sammamish grow. I love getting involved in the community. I do a lot of educational volunteering too. So when I went to Redmond, I created a Girls Who Code Club at Redmond Middle School. So I'd like to be able to give back to my community, because I think that if you live in a community, it's kind of your responsibility to help build and be a part of that community. And the only way you can do that is kind of by giving back. So.
Okay. Are there any specific issues you would like to see the Parks Commission take up during your tenure?
Yes. So I'm an avid bicyclist. When I was going to school in Chico, I would ride basically 6 miles one way back and forth to school, both for environmental reasons and for health reasons. But since I've moved to Sammamish, other than the Sammamish River Trail and a few of the trails that go by the power lines there, there seems to be kind of a lack of interconnectedness in terms of the walking trails and the bicyclist trails. And I think that has to do with a lot of how the growth has kind of seems like every little division seems to have like their own little walking trail, and they don't really seem to connect in any sort of meaningful way. So that would be something I would really like to address. As far as the events go, I unfortunately haven't lived in Sammamish long enough to know the full year's calendar of what events are out there, so I couldn't tell you in any meaningful sense whether or not I think I can improve on those. The Sammamish fireworks show, though, was pretty fun, so yeah. You guys have any other questions or concerns or anything I can address?
I don't
Sorry,
see any
I'm
other
a little
questions.
nervous.
No, that's okay. That's okay. We try not to be intimidating. I do have one question, just because you talked about the interconnectedness, and I know you're new, so you may not have heard of it, but I want to throw it out because it might be worth looking into. Have you heard about the Emerald Necklace?
I have not, actually.
Okay, so it's a trail that they're attempting to get to go through, and if you look up Sammamish Friends, you'll probably find some more information about it there, but it's something that we're working to piece together. It's a slow process, but would certainly.
Where are they trying to get it to go through, if you don't mind me asking?
All the way around the city.
Okay.
Yeah, so, yeah. Anyway, it's kind of it's a cool project, but it takes a lot of, it's not all in Sammamish. Part of it would be in the unincorporated King County area, but
Okay.
I would look into that because it might be interesting to you and appealing. So, Councilmember Ritchie.
I just wanted to thank you for stepping up. I know you're new to the community, and that's really important that folks, we have a very transient community too. And I think a lot of times people, move to a community and say, oh, I'm new here, I kind of have to wait and see what happens. And next thing you know, life takes you over and you've missed an opportunity. I mean, I know you have great experiences, working with the animal sanctuary, and, being new to the community doesn't mean you don't have great experiences from where you're from. And I think that's really important to step forward, and I'm grateful that you took the time to come out, and, I'm rooting for you. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I don't see any more questions. Thank you so much. Appreciate you coming in. You're welcome to stay in council chambers and listen if you'd like. Or
Thank you, guys. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Shanna, I know you know this drill already, but we'll have you come up here to the podium, just kind of give us a little bit of background, and then we'll ask you a few questions on the back end.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, council members. So I know the first question is provide a brief background of yourself that prepares you for this committee, and so I've prepared something. So before I started my first term on the City of Sammamish Planning Commission, I worked in local government for 10 years. I started my career in the city of Dana Point, where I worked in the administrative services and public works departments. I was focused mainly on producing the city's biannual budget, overseeing the waste and recycling services contract, and managing the capital improvement projects budget. We moved to the San Francisco Bay Area after my husband finished business school, and during this time, I worked for the County of San Mateo in the county manager's office. I was a principal budget analyst in that office. I was in charge of establishing the county's performance measures tracking program, monitoring department budgets, and managing the county's $35 million annual capital improvement projects program. I was a graduate of the county's management development program, and I also, as part of that program, took facilitation classes, which has really helped me over the last 2 years serving as chair. So we moved to Sammamish in order to live near my husband's family, who also lives in Sammamish, when my daughter was about to be born. When she was 1, I applied for the commission, and I was appointed by City Council in the beginning, or I was appointed to Planning Commission by the City Council in 2015. In 2016, I was elected by the commission to serve as vice chair, and in 2017 and 18, I was elected to serve as chair. I'm currently a stay-at-home parent with a 5-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old son. I have a master's degree in public administration from California State University of Long Beach, and I also have a bachelor's degree in economics from UCLA. Do you want me to keep going with the question? That was my background part.
I have a couple of questions, which I think
Yes,
you
sir.
probably have there, but what stimulates your interest in continuing to serve on the Planning Commission?
Okay, so I've always been a very civic-minded person, both in my professional life and as a volunteer. I actually love the work of being a planning commissioner. Serving the city of Sammamish in this way allows me to be intimately familiar with the issues facing our region and to think critically about how to address those issues or address the problems that we face with balanced solutions. I find great meaning in working collaboratively with the other 6 commissioners to bring recommendations to the City Council for your consideration. And volunteering as a planning commissioner brings me closer to the community and allows me to feel connected to the place where I live. I also enjoy engaging with the public and helping integrate the diverse visions residents and business owners have for the future of our city.
Okay. And if you're reappointed to the Planning Commission, are there any specific issues you would like to see them take up during that tenure?
Yes, sir. So first, the interim development regulations, which is what the planning, as you all know, the Planning Commission is currently working on, is complex and requires in-depth analysis and careful consideration of each new regulation. This is the type of work that really motivates me as a volunteer. Like, this is the meaty stuff that I really like. And the reason is because I feel that it will have a significant impact on the community, and I gain satisfaction of helping guide the commission through a process like that. So if it takes a month or if it takes longer than that, that's something that I look forward to working on if I'm reappointed. And so I have 3. Pardon if I could take that much time.
Please.
So looking forward, the Transportation Master Plan, for me, is the most exciting issue that hopefully we'll see over the next 4 years. I share the council's sentiment that fixing our transportation problems is the city's #1 priority because of the substantial growth and because of the negative impact that congestion has on our residents, our businesses, and quite frankly, our quality of life. As I mentioned earlier, my professional expertise is in managing capital improvement project budgets. And so for this reason, I do feel that my skills and experience would be very useful during the process of building out the Transportation Master Plan. And finally, my last one, I would really like the opportunity to finalize the Urban Forestry Management Plan because I care very deeply about the trees in our city and the forested character of Sammamish. It's what makes Sammamish as beautiful and unique as it is. And this project was actually started when I first joined the commission, and it is something that I hope to see completed before the end of my service.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
I'll open it up to council for any additional questions. Councilmember Ritchie.
Hi, Shana.
Hi, Jason.
I've been asking folks that have served on commissions recently or in the past or have the experience that you do. What works, what doesn't work on your commission, and what have you seen sitting, I know you've sat through some of our meetings on the council. Are you heard? Do you feel like you can build consensus? How does that work? I've seen it happen on the planning commission. I'm very grateful for your efforts to do that. But what's your secret? How do you do that? What makes that happen?
I like to think that giving everyone a chance to speak, even if it takes all night, is what it takes. And listening, even when you don't agree. And even when you don't agree, just sort of nod your head and thank that person for their opinion.
Okay.
I feel that I've been able to build consensus that way. There have been difficult personalities over the last 4 years, and almost all those people eventually end up becoming people that I would consider friends.
Thanks.
I don't see any more questions up here. Shanna, thank you very much. You're welcome to stay in council chambers and listen if you'd like. Or
Okay. Excellent.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for your time.
Good evening. So we'll have you come up to the podium here, give us a little bit of background on yourself, and we'll ask a few questions.
Great, thanks. I'll just leave it like that. Good evening, and thanks for this opportunity. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Caitlin Schreiber. I am a citizen of Sammamish. Well, I'm going to account since 2005. We moved on to the plateau in 2005, and I was part of the Klahani annexation area. And 3 houses later, I'm still excited to call Sammamish home. Most recently, we were really excited to achieve the dream of finding a house on Pine Lake. We're so excited to be able to live on Pine Lake. I'm right off of 228th, right across from the Habitat for Humanity houses. So we're actually really excited to be in such a vibrant part of the city. I'm the mother of 4 boys, so that really does take up most of my time right now. They're from 16 to 8, so that is definitely what I do. But in the time that I have not been working full-time, I've spent a lot of my free time being involved in my community in lots of different ways through PTA, Boy Scouts of America, through my church, through sports, other things, always trying to just find ways to just be involved. It's just something I've always been passionate about, and have always been very civically minded and wanted an opportunity to understand the civic process, the city process, and to be a bigger part of my community. So that's me. Do you want me to go on to the next question?
Sure, you can, or we can ask it.
Sure,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I have 2 questions
Sure.
that I'm going to ask both of them twice, since
Okay.
you're being, or possibly being considered for 2 different commissions here.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
The first is, what stimulates your interest in serving on the Parks Commission? And the second part of that what would be
Planning.
stimulate your interest in serving on the Human Services Commission?
Okay. Well, I believe that my first choice was the Planning Commission.
Planning, yes.
But then
It's
I've got
planning.
I remember I had a really hard time choosing whether it was the Health Services or the Parks Commission. So all of those I am very interested in, and I would say they're kind of all the same reason. I'm very passionate about my community, and I really like to be involved. I like to know what's going on. I like to understand what's going on. And personally, I'm not the one that likes to sit around and talk to the gospel, like so-and-so did this, so-and-so did that, without really knowing what's really happening. So that's the first part. I feel like we've done a really great job with the parks in the city. I'm pleased to see new parks being continuing to be built that have a lot of different opportunities for recreation in different ways, different kind of playgrounds, different kind of fields. So I would just love to continue to be part of that. In human services, I think a lot about the people in our community that want to live here but can't afford to live here. We definitely have a hard time having lots of places for low-income, middle-income communities and families, and I think that they need to be a part of Sammamish just as much as every other community does. So I would say, and then with the Planning Commission, I have always been interested in, as I said before, city government, city policies, land use regulation, and as I said, like to understand that better.
Okay. Are there any specific issues you would like to see either the Parks Commission or the Human Services Commission take up? Oh,
Planning.
Planning.
Yes, no parks.
Planning Commission, excuse me. I saw a P.
Okay, I would say with the, I'll start with the Planning Commission.
Okay.
And I would say, I think, in regards to planning, we all have an idea of what we want our city to be, but yet we are definitely constrained with things like the Growth Management Act that has made our city, the future of our city, be dense, which is wonderful because people want to live here and we want people to live here, but we really need to figure out how best to deal with the growth at the same time keeping our community livable, walkable, with traffic that's not too congested, all of those things together. And I think that there's definitely a way to marry all those priorities together. And I'm interested in being involved in that. In regards to was it health?
Human services.
Human
Health,
services.
health and
In
human
regards to human
services,
services, I think that it can sometimes be hard. It can sometimes be difficult to find those services here in Sammamish. We can go up to Redmond, we can go down to Issaquah. We talk about, I've gathered food before for lunch for the break or other things, but it's often thinking more about the people in the other parts of our wider community in the eastern part of King County, rather than people living here in Sammamish that need those kind of services.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Council, I would open it up to you to any additional questions you have. I'll ask one then, because you've applied for two. Do you have a preference on commission?
My preference is planning commission.
Okay.
That's really something that I'm passionate about. Can I be passionate about planning, city planning? That's definitely my preference.
I don't see any other questions. So Caitlin, thank you.
Okay.
We appreciate your time coming in this evening. You're welcome to stay in council chambers if you want to stay and listen or not. So
Okay, great.
Thank you so much for your time this evening.
Yep, thank you.
Good evening.
Hello.
So we'll have you give us a bit of background on yourself, and then we'll ask you a few questions on the back end.
Okay. So there were 3 questions that were sent to us. Do you want me to just go through?
You're welcome to dive into those.
All right. Okay. So thank you for having me. For a brief background on myself, I went to high school in a small city, and after school, I was fortunate to land an internship as a webmaster at City Hall. Walking distance from the school. The internship turned into a summer job, which turned into a full-time job in IT. In that role, I attended hundreds of hours of city council meetings and planning commission meetings, providing technical support. And during that time, I listened and gained a deeper understanding of how local government works. In 2010, I started working full-time in local politics, helping candidates listen to voters, articulate their vision, and become policymakers. In 2013, I worked for a King County council member, monitoring council and committee legislation, providing policy background to the council member, organizing town hall meetings, and engaging with constituents. In 2014, I co-founded a digital-first marketing agency that primarily focused on helping candidates run for office in the Pacific Northwest. And local governments communicate with their constituents. As a new resident of Sammamish, I'll look at the current and upcoming challenges with fresh eyes, but the experience to thoroughly review new proposals and ideas from our community. My interest, in short, in the Planning Commission is that I would like to give back to the community my wife and I are now calling home. The long answer is that as a kid, I was very inquisitive, asking my dad questions about why certain roads were built, why a grocery store wasn't in our community, why a roundabout instead of a stop sign, or lights in particular intersections. When I worked for City Hall, I discovered a lot of these things that I used to ask were handled by the Planning Commission. My interest in serving in this way has been with me for a long time, but until this point, I've moved every few years, and now as homeowners in Sammamish, I have a vested interest in the city's future, and I'd like to make the community better for everyone. Specific issues, I don't come to apply with an agenda. I'm sure there'll be topics addressed by the commission that will be more interesting to me than others. We have some specific big issues to address in 2019, such as the urban forest plan. However, I view the job of commissioner as being a subject matter expert on issues the council wishes us to review. That is something I fully intend to do. I have 2 non-policy related issues I'd like to address, both of which my experience prepares me for. First, we must ask the right questions. In the community survey about the urban forest plan, the first question was, agree or disagree, trees are important to the quality of life in Sammamish. To be successful in my job, I have to ask the right questions. Virtually everyone, including me, agrees trees are important. However, nowhere in the survey were residents asked to weigh the value of trees against other values. In my cover letter, I stated that good public policy requires public support, and I want to make sure that when the Planning Commission asks questions, they're asking the questions you, as representatives of the people, will find truly helpful in making a decision. Second, I'd like to do more to engage and inform the community. On November 28, I attended the community meeting for the Issaquah Pine Lakes road improvements between Southeast 32nd and Southeast Klahanie Boulevard, and was surprised to see how many people were in attendance. However, thousands of people will be impacted by these changes and others like it. Most people are too busy in life to inform themselves about what is happening in their community, much less actively participate. When the turnout at that meeting is measured against the totality of the impacted population, I do believe it was low. I'd like to use my experience to help the city provide residents the information that is quick and easy to consume and respond to, so we can hear from those residents who wouldn't otherwise have the time to participate in local government. If we don't actively solicit feedback from enough residents to provide a representative sample, the commission will be doing you a disservice.
Are there additional questions from council? Councilmember Ross.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. You also said secondarily you would, I'm assuming secondarily, preference Planning Commission, Human Services Commission? Which is your preference? You spoke a lot about Planning Commission.
Oh, I'm sorry, Planning Commission.
Yeah, Planning Commission. So as it relates to Human Services Commission, is there any passion or background you'd like to articulate on that?
To be honest, no, it should not have checked that box.
Okay, so strike out consideration for Human Services Commission. Got it. Okay.
I don't see any additional questions. Josh, thank you so much for coming in this evening. You are welcome to stay in council chambers if you'd like to stay and listen.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That invitation is not working.
Nope, nope. Paul, you need to make everybody feel more welcome to sit with you.
Clearly shying them off.
Good evening, John. We'll have you come up to the podium here, just give us a little bit of background, and then we'll ask a few questions.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Mayor, council members. Good to see you all again. Okay, I'm applying for the Planning Commission. I think you know, I ran for city council, and I found that that was an excellent education for understanding the issues and the problems that we face here in the city. So I feel this is an opportunity for me to provide what I've learned and also apply my background to the Planning Commission as to how we can help solve some of these problems. I've been a long-term resident of Sammamish, been up here for nearly or over 30 years, and I've seen our city grow from more of a village to a city. And of course, we've encountered problems along the way and concerns that all of our citizens have. And so I feel that with my background, I came out of healthcare diagnostics, where I was a director and a collaborator on teams. And I feel that my background could help in planning, because I think it takes an analytical mind to understand some of these problems that we're confronting. So I feel that applying this to the Planning Commission and looking at the issues in depth, collaborating with the other Planning Commission members could help to provide better information for the City Council as it comes to policy, programs, regulations, et cetera, that you need to make better decisions for our citizens.
I have a couple of questions for you. I think you touched on one. What stimulates your interest in serving on the Planning Commission?
I think it's twofold. I've seen our city evolve, like I said, from a village to more of a city. And our city has become a family unit dwelling city in a sense. It's all family homes. And we need to accommodate our city so that we have units or family units single units and also a place for seniors in our city to retire and to stay in the city. On a personal level, I have 4 daughters, and my youngest daughter had to move off the plateau to go to school because there were nothing here available. Well, the good news is she's coming back because of the Sky apartments that are now becoming available. But talking to a number of my peers, a lot of seniors are beginning to look at alternatives to Sammamish because, number one, they can't afford it, or number two, we don't have the downsized accommodations for them. So they may be looking at North Bend, they may be looking, Falls City, some of these other areas. So I'd like to help in that area too, to help balance and accommodate for our citizens the different options they have available to them.
Okay. Is there any specific issues you would like to see the Planning Commission take up during your tenure if you're appointed to this commission?
I'd like to see the Planning Commission take up how do we manage this growth in a sensible, practical, and common sense manner. Running for City Council, I became quite aware of the Growth Management Act and some of the limitations that we have with growth management. So I would feel strongly that we take a very close look as to how we, the citizens of Sammamish, can manage growth for Sammamish and not have it dictated from Seattle or Olympia.
Okay, thank you.
Council, any questions? No questions up here
No
for
questions?
you. No.
Oh, there must be some.
Well, that's why we provided some of them in advance. Yeah. Okay. No, I have no takers for you. Sorry.
Okay.
But I know we all appreciate you coming in this evening. You're welcome to stay in council chambers if you'd like to stay and listen. So,
Okay, well, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good to see you.
Yes. Good evening. We'll have you come up to the podium here, give us a little bit of background. I know we provided those 3 questions in advance. You're welcome to ask those or give us some other information, and we'll ask you a few questions on the back end.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for having me here tonight and giving me this opportunity. My background that relates to this position, I've been in public service most of my life. I did 33 years with the City of Bellevue before I retired in the police department. I retired as a lieutenant. I've also served in Duval as an operations commander up there for a while. And now that I'm retired, public service has been a part of my life since I was a teenager, really. And I have the time, and I've lived in Sammamish since '84, long before it was a city. So I've seen all this growth, and in my career with the City of Bellevue, had a lot to do with traffic flow and traffic management issues, and I just thought, that I might be able to contribute something, and thought I'd throw my hat in. Part of my background with public service in the police department has to do with case management, working with caseloads, criminal cases, obviously. But the process of doing that is a very pragmatic process. It's not unlike the scientific method where you search for the best answer. And you get a lot of discernment in your abilities set, and you get a lot of critical thinking skills and a lot of reason and logic skills. Those, I think, would serve me well in this position, to be able to look at a lot of facts and a lot of details and be able to sift through and make a decision based on the bigger picture and not get bogged down in little details. In an advisory position this is, I see that as a role bigger than trying to affect the change in a different way. The specific issue that I relate to the most is our traffic flow problem in the city and the difficulties that are facing us in the future. And I understand that anything we do is not going to really see an effect for maybe 10 years or more. That's just part of the process. So I'm very comfortable with that process. I've seen it in the city of Bellevue. And from my perspective, growing up in the city through junior high and high school and then working there for over 30 years, one of the things that I learned is how they were able to achieve their goals. And I remember back in the 80s when I first started there in 1980, the city planners and the things kept the police department very well, afoot of what was going on and what their long-term plans were. And when I retired, I was able to see that they actually were successful in doing that. And through that several decades of being there and being aware in different positions I had of the council and what the council was doing and how things were changing and seeing the dynamic change in the city over that period, it was very impressive to me that the plans that they were making in the 70s and early 80s, they were able to successfully achieve. So I've seen that process, and it was there's some other towns around here that were less successful in achieving continuity and consistency in their growth process. So it's interesting to see those differences. I think I've answered those 3 questions, and I'm willing to take any questions from the board.
Council, are there any additional questions?
Yep, might cover that base. Yeah. You had indicated, too, that you might be interested in serving on the Parks Commission as well. So maybe you could also answer those 2 questions in terms of your interest in any particular issues as it relates to the Parks Commission as well.
Okay. I think, very honestly, I'm probably better set up for the Planning Commission. Okay. But as you well know, Bellevue's park system is very dynamic and very well run. Different parts of my career, I was very involved with Parks and Rec as a representative of the police department. I was one of the original 2 full-time bike patrol officers Bellevue had back in the very early 90s. And we worked very extensively with the park rangers and the lifeguards and beach parks and all that kind of stuff. So I became very familiar with the park system and the things that they provided, which normally an officer might not understand, but all the myriad of programs, after-school programs, before-school programs, art programs, athletics, all kinds of stuff. And it always really impressed me that the Parks Department was that vibrant and involved, because I'd never understood that before. And then, as my career progressed and then started getting promoted and seeing things from a different, more of a managerial perspective, again, dealing with the Parks Department on security issues, after-hours issues, those kinds of things. It was really a fascinating look at the city and how it operated, how everybody worked as a team to solve a problem that the parks was having, whether it be fire, police, streets, utilities, whatever it might be. And Bellevue continually develops parks, and as I'm sure you all know, and a very dynamic part of the process of the city. So I'm familiar with that. I'm very supportive of it. I think it's a wonderful thing that the city can do for the community. Be able to recreate and socialize within the city in open spaces is a huge quality of life issue that I think we all have made very clear. So I thought at the time I filled out those applications that it's not always where you may want to serve that you end up serving well, and I thought, why not, put my name in for that one also.
Good, thank you.
Yep.
Councilmember Ritchie.
Mark, I just want to thank you for your service as a police officer in public service, and I mean that in public safety in and of itself. I mean, frankly, that's a view we don't have right now that I'm aware of on our planning commission, and that's incredibly important that we have that point of view. not just the traffic enforcement. I mean, you bring a very unique point of view, but I just want to thank you for your career of service and would welcome that idea and that perspective on our Planning Commission. So thank you.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Moran.
Well, one, I want to say the very same thing Councilmember Ritchie said from having an officer in our family, too. So thank you very much. I also, I hadn't even thought about that perspective as to the implementation into the planning, and I just think that I just can't believe I didn't think of that before, but what a perfect background to bring such, great input into that. So I'm very excited. Thank you very much for putting in your application.
You're welcome. Thank you for the opportunity.
I don't see any more questions. Mark, thank you very much. Appreciate your time this evening. You're welcome to stay in council chambers if you'd like. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. Hey, good evening. We'll have you come up to the podium here and give us a bit of background here, and we'll ask a few questions.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much for affording me the opportunity to come here and talk about this. A little bit of background. My wife, Marina, and my son, Beckett, and I moved here about 6 years ago for my job. And I moved first. So it was just sort of happenstance that I wound up in Sammamish because our real estate agent happened to be out of town for the first 5 months that I was here, so she let me rent her house. And, I just hung around. I really liked Sammamish. Then my wife and son came up for a long weekend, and they liked it too. They liked it enough that, we went to a lot of places. We went to Mercer Island, we went to Redmond, we went to Kirkland, we went all the way out to Bainbridge, but we always came back to Sammamish. And for the reasons that everybody says, right? It's the parks, it's the lakes, it's the Lake Washington School District, it's the family-friendly atmosphere, the safety, all of that. Everybody says that, but it's true. And so this is where we came to be.
Good.
Okay, I have a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
What stimulates your interest in serving on the Planning Commission?
Well, a couple of things. Mostly I've been here for 6 years and I've seen a lot of growth. And it seems that right now, Sammamish is in kind of an inflection point. It's like at a crossroads. What kind of community are we going to be? When we first moved here, we used to drive around the town, and my wife would say, Sammamish isn't really a town. It's a street, right? It's 228th Avenue running north to south, a strip mall in the north and a strip mall in the south, and not much in between. That's starting to change. Maybe what we need is, dare I say it, town center. But nonetheless, that's not a bad thing, really, if you think about it. I mean, it would enhance the sense of community. But I sense that this community is reaching a point where we have to decide how we're going to manage our growth and what we're going to do with this town center as it seems to be getting a little bit of steam here, and how we're going to preserve what makes Sammamish a special place to live, what attracted me and my family, and maybe many of you here. And as we grow, I don't want us to lose sight or lose those things that make Sammamish a special place to live. I think that's what kind of stimulates my interest in serving on the Planning Commission, because it's going to be a very interesting time to be on a Planning Commission over the next few years, and it's also going to be an important time. We're at a critical juncture for our community, and the kind of character and the sort of community that we want to be.
Okay. If you're selected for the Planning Commission, is there any particular issues you would like to see them take up in your tenure?
Yeah, actually, there are a few. I think particularly of transportation. For a while when I lived here, since I lived here, I worked downtown in Seattle. And I was kind of surprised to discover that if I wanted to take the Express Sound Transit bus to downtown Seattle, I had to go to Redmond instead of having something in this community. I just kind of assumed there was, and it turns out there really wasn't. I know there's been some discussion of having a park and ride here, and I think that's a really good idea. I think there needs to be, especially as the community grows and attracts more people. Many of them will want to work in Seattle or do work in Seattle, and they're going to need some sort of transportation And so, more of an emphasis on public transportation would really be helpful here. And as I alluded to earlier, I think also, working on how we envision this community going forward. I know there's been some work on interim development regulations and more permanent regulations as well, but those are also things that need to be addressed going forward. And those are kind of the things I'd like to see over the next few years.
Okay. You also indicated that you might be interested in serving on the Human Services Commission.
Yes.
Any preference on which one of those takes priority?
Well, I'd say evidently probably this one. Yeah, the Planning Commission takes priority for me, although I would actually, there's a lot of interesting things that go on with the Human Relations Committee as well. Either one of those would be suitable. From my perspective, I think the Planning Commission is going to be a very interesting place to be.
Okay.
I think that's all I'd say about that.
Okay, thank you.
Council, are there any additional questions that you'd like to ask? Okay, I'm not seeing any. So thank you so much for your time this evening.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You are welcome to stay here if you'd like to finish watching the interviews. Otherwise, we thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you very much.
Good evening. We'll have you come up to the podium here, and would you give us a bit of background, and then we'll ask you a few questions.
Sure. Well, my name is Matt Howarth. I see that you're saving the best for last, or that's how I jokingly put it. I'm a fairly new resident to Sammamish. I moved here 2.5 years ago. It was summer of 2016. I am a lifelong resident of Idaho, lived in Boise for about the 15 years prior to that. A job transfer internally brought me out to the area.
Okay, if you're selected to serve on the Planning Commission, what stimulates your interest in that particular commission?
Well, there's a few points on that. Most specifically, this was an area we chose for our daughter to live. The number one criterion on how well a person does, at least in a data point driven world in society, is the zip code that they grow up in. It's the number one determinant on your economic status in life. So we purposely chose to live out here in this area for excellent quality of life, excellent opportunities with schools, and a close commute into the city for myself. And I want to make sure that that essence of the city is preserved not only for myself and my daughter as she grows, but for others in the area, because that's such a huge driver of why people want to move to our area. Specifically on top of that is where I deal in commercial lending. A lot of what I do day in and day out is helping folks develop and build, not just here, but across kind of the Western United States. And so a little bit greedily, it would help me in my own understanding of some of the construction process, the building and permitting process, so I can be more knowledgeable and make better decisions, hopefully helping to alleviate some issues with maybe things that go over cost or things that are not profitable for developers, which can sometimes turn into a detriment to the city and community.
Okay. If you're selected for the Planning Commission, is there any particular issues you would like to see them take up during your tenure?
I was lucky enough to be able to sit in on kind of the community planning meeting that happened, I think, on the 13th of December. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting for me to get to talk and hear from a few developers and a few other folks like myself who maybe were recently moved here or some that had been here for a long time. And it seemed like the city itself and the area had had kind of some very similar codes for many, many years without a lot of changes. But over maybe the last 5 or 6 or 7 years, it's not just changed once or twice, it's changed 3 or 4 times. And I think some consistency would be key, is to figure out exactly what everyone would like things to look like, or at least have directionally accurate vision of what that would be, and to try and set some flexible enough goals so that we can see how it gets there. I'm fully aware that anything that would happen today would likely take at least a decade before you'd have any measurable results of the outcome. I think one of the things that I got out of that meeting in December is most of the stuff that's being built around here is actually on permits that were prior to the ones that were prior to the last ones. They were done in 2010 or 11, or I think in one instance, 2008. I believe one of them said that that's when they had things out there.
Okay, thank you.
Council, are there additional questions that you would like to ask? Councilmember Valderrama.
Yeah, so Matt, did I understand correctly that you thought the greatest indicator would be the zip code that would live in? Given we have multiple zip codes, which zip code did you choose to live in?
I know, that's a little pointed. I actually live in the Klahani community, so, and it was still technically part of Sammamish when I moved here in 2016.
All right, just wanted to make sure we were on sync.
That came from Freakonomics, so you can double check that with economist Stephen Levitt.
Yeah. Thank you.
I don't see any additional questions. So Matt, thank you very much. We appreciate your time this evening.
Thank you.
I think that concludes all of our interviews.
It does.
Very good.
Thank you, guys.
Sorry, I need to get back to my agenda here. I think that is it. So would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Okay. I didn't hear Councilmember Hornish, but I'm assuming he was an aye. 6-1.
No, I was on the whole time.
Hornish abstained or went to sleep?
I don't think he's asleep, but I don't know. Is he still on?
No, I voted.
Yeah, he's on.
You hear me?
He voted.
I voted, yeah.
Hear him.
Hey, aye.
Yes. Okay. We are adjourned.